so now I'm going to be talking to you.
Yes.
Okay.
We are here today with Honorable Judge Robin Ransom of the Supreme Court of Missouri. Thank you sincerely for this opportunity and agreeing for this interview. Honorable Judge Ransom, you are known as a trailblazer, making history several times as the first African-American woman to preside over the Judicial Circuit Court in St. Louis, the second to serve on the Court of Appeals, and the first African-American woman appointed to the Missouri Supreme Court. Can you tell us what inspired you to become a judge in the first place, and what has your journey been like and the ups and downs you faced?
Okay, number one, the inspiration is I like to talk. I like people. I love public speaking. And so when I was younger, my older siblings say I had a speech impediment. Obviously, I don't remember, but I do remember my dad taking me to speech lessons just to learn how to be more comfortable with public speaking. And then after that, every time there was a speech, for church or for school, I would volunteer, and I enjoy it. I'm a people person on the outside. Inside, I'm really, I wouldn't say introverted, but it's more of a facade. I mean, I like people, but I'm very much a recluse in a lot of different ways. I know that's a little bit opposites, but I mean, that's really my true temperament. And so the public speaking would always give me an opportunity to put myself out there, but just a bit, because there's always a topic, or something that you're talking about. But I didn't have to talk about me. And so I think just in the course of all of that and learning how to be comfortable in being in front of people, I thought about lawyering for a bit, but I wasn't serious. I had an aunt who's an attorney. I had a brother-in-law who's an attorney. My older brother went to law school and then went to the FBI. So, I had people who were influential, but honestly, law school for me was just a way not to work. And then that's just being honest. I graduated college in 3 years, and I thought I was going to come home and hang out with mom and dad and travel and sleep because I'm the youngest and I was spoiled. And my dad's like, no, you're either going to keep going to school or you're going to go to work. And so that's when the people in my life were like, well, why don't you try law school? You may enjoy it. And so that's how all of that happened. And then I also love mysteries. I'm a total mystery buff. And so I know you're too young to know Matlock and Perry Mason, the old ones. But that's stuff that my dad and I watched together. And so for me, it was like, oh my God, I'm going to be like Perry Mason and investigate and have all of these fun things happen. And law and school is a little bit different, certainly, than television. But those are all of the things that influenced me to at least give the legal career a chance.
That's a great story. And once you had a job, what was the journey from there like, and maybe some ups and downs throughout?
Again, I think the reality sits in that practicing law is not television. There is no person that jumps up from the crowd and says, I did it, I confess. It's not the excitement that you see on television. Being in a courtroom is actually more cerebral. It's very collegial. There are a lot of conversations that occur. Every now and then, there is some contested fireworks, but for the most part, it really isn't. There's one side here, there's one side there. People are debating basically as to how to come to some resolution. I think in my career, it's very odd to say I really haven't suffered any downs, I guess. I've met a lot of great people, and every job that I've gotten after my first job is because somebody called and asked me to apply. And so I've just had a lot of really good connections. I've enjoyed getting to know the other attorneys, but I think the fun part of the job is getting to know the public. When you're in circuit court and you're doing jury trials and you're meeting these 60 or 90 people who come in for jury selection, and they're all residents of your community that you don't know. And you get to know these people over the course of 2 or 3 days. That to me was very entertaining.
Right.
But yeah, as far as any real downs in my career, I haven't had any. I think life with no adversity is no fun. Right. I think having adversity helps you to appreciate when the good stuff happens. Right. And so, sure, there were things whether it was a case that I lost or in juvenile court, dealing with termination of parental rights or taking away someone's child, those things certainly are not highlights of one's day. But at the end of the day, as someone who takes an oath to do the best you can and to follow the laws and the Constitution, I always went home happy, regardless of the outcome.
That's wonderful. And as one of the key leaders of the judicial branch, can you share with us an accomplishment that you're personally most proud of?
Legally, I think it's being here. Everybody says, they always say, how does it feel? And I said, that's a question that I really can't sum up. I think about my mom, I think about my dad, where I'm from. I'm from the city of St. Louis, born and bred. My dad worked as a fireman in the 60s, and at the time that he was employed, the firehouse was still segregated. And so he went through a lot of adversity there. But what he did for the four of us was we were never taught to be bitter or to be angry, but we were taught to just be open and to accept people for what they are. So whether they look like you or not, if you like them, great. And if you don't and you have a just reason, that's fine. But to not let like the outward appearance or something impact how you relate to people. And I think because of that experience, driving past the courthouse in juvenile court, and I would say, boy, it'd be fun to work there one day. And then to actually go there as a juvenile court judge. When I was in high school, I would go and watch trials just for fun. And to go back to that court as a judge. I never came here to visit, and I always thought like the Supreme Court was just like,
Right.
So, to actually get here, I laughed like the first couple of days because I kept saying, who made that choice? Like, they picked me, like it really happened.
Right.
And then you go through a little self-doubt because I've always held these people in such high esteem. You start asking yourself, do you belong here? Because as a judge, everybody's passed the bar. Everybody's been to law school. Everybody has certain legal experiences. But then you start asking yourself, well, what is it that I bring to this position that makes me a good fit and makes me one who can fulfill all of the faith and trust that the governor had in me to select me in the first place. So, this certainly is the pinnacle of my legal career. And I think the thing that makes it the most rewarding is I didn't aspire to it. Like, I'm not a person who came out of law school and said, one day I'm going to be a judge. I just came out of law school and said, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to try to help people and try to enjoy what I do on a daily basis. And to have all of that get me to the top, for me, has been overwhelmingly successful and fulfilling. I can't tell you every day I still wake up thinking, I'm on the Supreme Court of Missouri. Well, I'll be darned. That's just a great feeling.
Right.
So that pretty much is it for me.
While working with high-profile cases, do you receive pressure, threats? And if so, how do you handle them?
You know what? In my entire career, I've had two incidents. One, an individual was very angry because he had been detained, he had been locked up, it was a probation case, and I think the recommendation may have been to send him to prison. And that was just the recommendation, like I hadn't even said a word. And he just lit into me from A to Z, used every possible word, imaginable in court. And I just started laughing because I kept thinking, I can't believe this is going on in an open courtroom. And I think once I started laughing, he started laughing because he didn't know why I was laughing. And it turned out once, we had a really good conversation, that case worked out, to his benefit. But I think I'm not a knee-jerk person. I've been yelled at. That's the first time I've been cursed at in court. But even though you wear the robe, sometimes I think people believe that we, should rule with an iron fist and just lower the boom on everybody. And to me, that's not what court is. Whether you're on the losing side or the winning side. I want everybody to still have the experience that they were heard, they were listened to, and that justice, whether you won or not, but that justice was still served. And so that's like one incident. And then I did actually have another incident where the girlfriend of an inmate, and this inmate was a younger kid, I'll say 23, 24, and he and I had a really good rapport, and he really liked my staff. It was almost like he was getting locked up just to come in and say hello. I mean, he had really just gotten used to dealing with our courtroom. Well, the girlfriend got my phone number and called me on my cell phone and started, talking about his case. And, she was talking about where I lived. And I thought, who are these? Like, how does that happen? And so, I had to have a conversation with him, that's not appropriate. And I didn't feel threatened, but it was just the fact that someone felt the need to approach me outside of the job about a case that's not even her case. And that's the issue that judges face. I mean, people are on the internet 24/7, and unfortunately, if people really, want to dig and scrape to try to find, little tidbits, they can. And I'm not really sure there's a lot that can be done to protect judges at this point. And so my own personal response to that has to always try to treat people with kindness. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to, rule adversely in their case. But I don't try to almost incite, other people with how I conduct myself in the courtroom. But no, unfortunately, worrying about your security. I've been approached in grocery stores. And fortunately, they've been good, things that have happened. But it's but I'm in the grocery store.
Right.
I don't want to hear about what we did about your case last week. I've been approached in the bank. And some of it may be because the city of St. Louis was such a smaller community. In the county, I'm not sure it would happen as often because it's a bigger area. And now with me being here, hopefully not. But that's just something that I think judges have to deal with.
Right. And I think
I told you I like to talk a lot.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think it's truly amazing how, a lot of times when people are cursed at or yelled at to react violently, but I think it's amazing. React calmly. I think that's true.
I have children.
Right.
Although they don't curse,
right.
But, honestly, you really do try to diffuse.
Right.
And if you're the one yelling and screaming, then everybody else in the courtroom, they're going to yell and scream.
Right.
And the temperament of the courtroom really starts with the person on the bench.
Right.
And if you're always kind of mellow, and that really is my temperament, I just don't really get fazed by stuff. But if you can just sort of keep an even keel, at least it sort of convinces everybody else that you have control, even when you don't.
Right.
But you're convincing people that you do, and that helps to maintain some level of balance and control.
Right. And you talked about a little bit, but with your experience with the juvenile justice system, what are some ways young people can learn to respect and abide by the law?
One, I would always suggest to go to court. People, in light of a lot of negative publicity that courts have gotten, with racial riots, whether it's the police, whether it's the courts, the judicial system has certainly lately has all sort of been lumped into one. And it's like judges are bad and police are bad and prosecutors are bad. And I really believe that it would be advantageous to young people to go into a courtroom and to see what actually happens. And it's whether it's your municipal court or whether or not it's the circuit court, you need to see judges in action. You need to see prosecutors in action. And I know I've had kids or classrooms call me and say, hey, I've got a class who wants to go and see a case. And I would try to find cases because it's difficult to pinpoint when a trial is going to happen, especially in COVID. But kids really need to understand the system. And they need to understand that they're part of it. Like for me, if I'm on trial, I want 12 people who are going to come in there and listen and do the best that they can. But if those 12 people are people who say, I hate the system, I hate the police, nothing works, well, I may get a fair shake, I may not. And that's sort of what we're seeing in the community, is that there are so many people who feel that they're not listened to and they're not part of the system. But then my flip to that is, but you have to participate in the system in order to feel that you're a part of it. And so with, teenagers, I mean, you all can't do jury duty, but you can certainly know like your civic responsibilities. When you are of age, you can certainly vote. You can certainly, show up when they say it's your time to do jury duty and not come in with an excuse of, well, I've got to work and I'm just too tired, or I don't care, or I don't believe in the system. Because what that does is that eliminates a lot of people who could be fair jurors for somebody else. But a lot of kids are just like, I don't care. I'm like, but this is your government. This is the community that 20 years from now, you and your, other classmates will be running. And if you don't care now, you're not going to have the knowledge, later. And I think when I was a kid, on Saturdays, like all of our cartoons was about the Constitution,
Right.
How a bill is created. It really emphasized those things. And now, you all have the internet, and I call it like the internet is just like Wild Nation. You don't have to watch anything that's educational or that's informative, or you get all of the hyped up stuff,
Right.
Instead of like the real reality and news of it all.
Right.
But being just a participant and knowing what your rights are really is key. And not what somebody else said, but knowing for yourself, what are my rights? How do I do this? How do I do this? And how do I be a better part of the system?
Right. And is there like a way people can know like when a certain case is happening in any court near them?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the more serious cases are closed on CaseNet. So, like, I don't know if you're familiar with CaseNet, but it's a system out there where you can sort of look up names of people and find out limited information. But you can always call, like, the clerk's office. You can call if you know a lawyer, that you're familiar or friendly with. They could look things up. Like I said, I've had teachers contact me, and I was a regular speaker at St. Mary's High School. And so I would always, make an arrangement for their class to go downtown and to see a case. But yeah, and it's open. That's the one thing about court. The doors are open. You don't have to wait to come in. Unless the bailiff is there with the door closed, and that's usually because the judge is speaking or giving instructions. But if it's not a juvenile case or a domestic case, generally it's wide open. You can go in there and sit. You can leave when you want. And they're actually happy to see young faces in there, people who are really, wanting to be a part of it.
And I think you talked about it too, but we cannot thank our law enforcement officials and our judges enough for working hard to keep us safe. And you talked about voting as well. So I actually campaigned for youth to vote when they turned 18. But it can be overwhelming for an 18-year-old who's just graduated high school to see several judges on the ballot.
Right.
So how do you think first-time voters can start thinking of the process, and what are some factors one should consider while evaluating and voting?
We really need to do a better job as lawyers and judges in getting the word out to the community. But they do have a website. It's on the Missouri Bar website, and it ranks every judge who's on that ballot that particular time, and it talks about that judge's strengths, it talks about that judge's weaknesses, and then I think there's a bottom line recommendation as to whether or not the judge should be retained or not retained. And that's all they have to vote on. And people can take that information. If they recommend retention or that judge be retained, then that's a yes vote. And unfortunately, I've been in line and I've heard people say, well, I'm just going to vote no for all men or no for all the women, or I don't like the last name. And it's like, that's not how we pick leaders. You pick based on knowledge of the individual. And the way I look at it is, if you haven't had any negative interaction with that judge, you haven't been in court, and that recommendation is to retain, the people who evaluate judges obviously believe that judge has done a sufficient enough job to keep his or her job. And why would you just, on a whim, vote no? Most people who are voting have not had a criminal case or a civil case, and they don't even know these people personally. But when you're picking someone by their name or gender, those are not factors to whether or not someone's going to be a good judicial officer. So there is a website. It's not, in my opinion, publicized enough for people to know where to get it. But if you go on the internet, and I think it's like Your Missouri Judges or MissouriBar.org, if you look in there, you can find that there are evaluations that they do before every election.
Thank you so much for that. And so Judge Ransom, you talk about your vision of getting 15 to 25-year-olds excited about the court system, their judiciary, their city where they live. Mm-hmm. So are there any opportunities for high school students in Missouri to get involved with your office?
Well, I have a 15 to 25. I have two 15 to 25-year-olds, and I'm always trying to encourage them to care. And honestly, at those ages, you're sort of in your own world. There are volunteer opportunities. Now, what they are here at the Supreme Court, I'm not aware of. And then some courts don't have volunteer opportunities because of confidentiality. So if kids were interested in being in juvenile court, they don't have usually volunteer programs, because what if you saw a classmate, who's in there, and, now that person, I'd say, is sort of outed to the community that they have had a criminal case or whatever the issue is. But I think in prosecutors' offices, sometimes in public defender offices, they allow teens to come in and maybe volunteer during the summers. I know I did it in law school. I didn't do it in high school. I'm not sure if the law firms would, but I'm sure there are a lot of opportunities for people to volunteer. And then there are some legal organizations who do like charity work in the community. And so even though you're not volunteering in a legal sense, you're still volunteering maybe to make sandwiches or to prepare food baskets for other people, and that still gets you, sort of acclimated to what service is. And I think that's what I preach to both my kids. They're 16 and 21, that everything does not require a paycheck. And for kids, it's like, well, I'm going to work for free. It's not work, it's called service. And I think we've sort of gotten away from that. When I was in high school, we had to do service projects and service hours, and I encourage kids to volunteer. And it doesn't always have to be legal. I mean, they've got animal shelters who are begging for volunteers. They have, homeless organizations. But a lot of that, if you, in my opinion, are used to giving of yourself, no matter, who and what the time that you're giving is, you become accustomed to service. And I think one thing that I think our community lacks is that whole empathy towards one another. There are a lot of people who are way up high on the chain, and there are a lot of people who are down on the bottom. There are a lot of people who are in the middle. But at the end of the day, everybody matters, and everybody counts. And I'm just very big on kids who love volunteering and servicing wherever, and however they can.
And how did the practice of law change in the last 10 years? And what do you anticipate in the next 10 years in terms of the practice of law and the implementation of law?
I'd say when I first started, it seemed as if there was a lot more collegiality. People were very cordial and friendly. And some of it is just a sign of the times. I think I always talk about the internet, and I always say it's the downfall to, mankind. And I say that in jest, but the internet really has created a culture where I don't really need to see you. I don't need to talk to you. I don't need any of that, because I can get all of that over here. And I think so social contact, social skills, especially in younger people, I think are lost. How you prepare for court, how you dress in court. Do you chew gum in court? I've seen people do that. And it's like, I wouldn't let my kids chew gum in a conversation with me. But you're in court and you're just whacking away. Court used to be a very regal thing. When you went to court, it was a big deal. And now, it's become very casual. And I'd like to see it, change a little bit. And that's what's nice about being here, because it's still very much about being formal and the decorum that I think court deserves. We wear robes not to be special, but it sets the tone that this is a place where we're here to do business and to do justice. And I just think we've all gotten casual as to how we handle one another, how we handle the rules. It's like, well, that's fine. No, it's not fine. We still need to do things by the book in the way that we're supposed to. And I'd really like to see that change. The other thing is this whole animus towards the system, that the system isn't fair and the system doesn't care about people. And I'm a big believer in our judicial system. I think it's the best one we've got. And the people who don't like it, my thing is to come up with an alternative. But if you look in other countries and other jurisdictions, I don't think anything works as well as the judicial system that we have in the United States. Do we get it right 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But are we wrong 50% of the time? Absolutely not. And so I'd love to see the tide turn, where instead of talking about how horrible everyone thinks, police are, the judges are, the system is, that we all find a way to get to a mid-level of respect for one another and realize these jobs are not easy. Making decisions about someone's life is certainly not easy, and that we all do the best we can, even in situations where mistakes may have been made.
Definitely. And so access to justice is a basic principle of the rule of law. But a recent study published in Legal Service Corporation Justice Gap found only 14% of low-income Americans who reported a problem received adequate legal assistance. So what is one of the best ways to help everyone get adequate legal assistance?
They actually have, not a panel, but there's a group here that talks about trying to get everybody, online, on the internet, especially when you talk about the different municipalities and traffic violations and people who are locked up because they can't pay tickets. But then if you're talking about people who don't have access to the internet, they're trying to make sure that that's not a barrier. Unfortunately, again, it comes down to your socioeconomic place in society. And certainly that should not be a barrier to anyone receiving justice or receiving access to a court. But there's only so much that courts can do. And then courts are limited with their financial resources. One thing that they've done in the municipalities is that they've pooled a lot of those. And so instead of having, let's say, 100 or 200 different little cities, they tried to have those cities combined to a certain extent, and not, to rush off and lock people up because they can't pay tickets. I know we also have legal services, although, they're flooded, because they take individuals who can't necessarily pay, and they handle primarily the civil cases or domestic cases. The public defender's office, they're overwhelmed with applications, and they handle the criminal cases for indigent people. So there are programs that are already out there, but everybody's sort of fighting for the same dollar. But the lawyers of Missouri, and I would say probably nationwide, everybody is working to make sure that poverty is not a barrier for any type of, access to the courts. But unfortunately, I'm sure people slip through the cracks.
So, Judge Robin Ransom, if you were given magical powers, what would you do?
Win the lottery. Oh. Have my kids graduate, move away. I hope they don't watch this because I love them dearly, but they do need to move at some point. Magical powers. You know what I thought about, honestly, when I became a judge in juvenile court? I thought about opening a boarding school. And, my interest in it was as a kid, again, long before you. There was a television show, and it was a girls' boarding school. It was called The Facts of Life, and it just seemed like that is perfect. You go to school, you make friends, but you live there, and isn't it great? And then when I went to middle school, we actually played sports against a school that had a boarding component, and that was Thomas Jefferson. And I really enjoyed talking to those kids about their experience and what it was like, being in a boarding school. And so seeing all of the kids that came into juvenile court in a lot of just horrific circumstances, I thought one way to maybe help these children would be to have a boarding school in the middle of the city of St. Louis. And someone said, well, you take them away from home? And it's like, but this is like the educational component, but to also have their families, welcomed and the whole bit. So that's just a pie in the sky idea that I thought about 20 years ago. And being from North St. Louis, again, I think if I had magical powers, that area would be what it was when I grew up, which was just a haven. I mean, it was wonderful, and the families there all wanted the best for their kids. And I think for me, with a background in juvenile work, that's all I want. All kids should be happy, healthy. And that's what I always said about my kids. If they're happy and healthy, then I've done my job. It doesn't matter, what their aspirations are. Kids are on all different levels and they all want to do different things. But when I look at my kids and the lifestyle that they've lived, I want that for every kid. And it doesn't mean that my kids have had everything that they've wanted, but they've had everything that they've needed. And when you see that there are tons of children in our community, and it's not just in the city, it's just that's what I'm familiar with. But when you see tons of kids in need, it's very crushing to me. Because again, in 10 years, 20 years, those children are going to be the leaders in society. And if they don't have a great start down here, they may not even make it up there. And I've certified a lot of kids to stand trial as adults in juvenile court. And most of those kids, I still remember those cases. And so, magical powers for me would be, just making sure that every kid had an advantage. Every kid had an opportunity to be whatever it is that they're meant to be. Because I do think destiny plays a lot in that. But also, if you don't have the support or the wherewithal to even reach your destiny, you're never going to make it.
That's a great idea. Is there time for one more question?
Sure.
What is your advice for, what is your advice for teens and youth that aspire to pursue a career in law and become future judges?
One, make sure you know what your personality is and don't change. Everyone's told me that I wasn't social enough. Well, I really choose not to be. And it's not, again, that there is any dislike towards socializing, but I like time away from work. I work very hard, 9 to 5, and when work is done, I would always go away and do something that's non-lawyer-esque. And they were like, well, don't you want to hang out with other lawyers? Not really. And I have a lot of things that I do in my personal or social time that's very fulfilling, but that also gives me an opportunity to really give it my all when I'm back at work. And so don't let people tell you what you need to be or how you ought to behave or what you need to look like or how you need to speak. Because again, my career has moved forward because of all of the relationships I've made with people starting from 1992. And I still have very good friends from every job I've ever had. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to move up and step up that you don't enjoy where you are. And so my advice to kids is your life is going to unfold the way that it's meant to if you just stay the course. You don't have to try to get there all at once, but take time to figure out who you are, because who you think you are changes. And the older you get, you find out a little bit more about yourself, some things you're going to really like and think, boy, I am just awesome. And then you're going to find out some things about yourself that maybe you don't like, or things that you want to tweak or change. But so many kids, I think, are so busy trying to hurry up and get to the finish line that they don't take the time to slowly go step by step by step to really enjoy the process. Because anyone who's fortunate, especially now and in COVID times, to just look back on life and realize, A, you're still here, and you're healthy, and you're, doing your dream, and you're doing what you want to do, that in and of itself is a successful.
Thank you so much for this interview and your phenomenal leadership.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yep.